From a man who took his nickname from the great warriors of old Japan to another who is simply known as Rampage, here are the MMA fighters that fear no one. And on that subject, there are few better places to begin than with Shogun Rua. This former UFC and Pride champion truly did it all. He competed against the best of the best in the sports marquee division, and in his earlier days in Japan, his performance in their 2005 Grand Prix at middleweight ensured his legend status. He fought middleweights, light heavyweights, and even heavyweights, and this dude's demeanor never once changed. Shogun was a technician, yes, but he had that dog in him, and he was capable of biting down on the mouthpiece whenever required. Just look at his matchup with Dan Henderson later in his career. No man with fear in his heart can dig deep like that. But from one legendary Brazilian, we move to another, an icon whose resume eclipses that of even the greatest of competitors. Any MMA fan who grew up in the mid-2000s had a poster of Anderson Silva on their wall. He was a man capable of blurring the lines between fiction and reality. Some of his greatest moments don't even seem real now, but the confidence Anderson had in himself to fight his way through his career, to take risks like no one else, in the face of some of the most fearsome names in the sport, to put your hands by your side and call on your opponent to try and hit you. That's an insane level of mental fortitude right there. Silva liked to play with his opponents, showing absolutely no regard for the danger in front of him. Indeed, that recklessness eventually led to him getting tagged and KO'd by Chris Weidman. But you've got to respect the man for living and dying by the sword. Hell, he broke his leg, rehabbed it, came back, and is still fighting today at the age of 48. Most fighters are 10, sometimes 15 years retired at that stage.
I worked hard for this fight. I respect my fans in UFC, the fans here tonight. I respect USA because my big dream is working.
But not Anderson Silva. No, he still has a few more years in him, it seems. Yeah, the Spider was a true one in a million kind of fighter. But moving on from the iconic yellow shorts of Silva, we next look at the fight kit adorned by the Croatian flag, the preferred attire of one Mirko Cro Cop. Fighting in the heavyweight division is always going to be a dicey proposition. Even the slightest mistake can have truly devastating consequences. But for Mirko Cro Cop, he lived the life of a heavyweight in MMA and kickboxing, and never once seemed like he was out of his depth. In 2004, he made one of the single most iconic call-outs in MMA history, when he very calmly called Fedor Emelianenko to the cage. That's not the move of an unconfident man. And though he couldn't dethrone the last emperor, Cro Cop never turned down a fight when he was able to take it. If you've never seen the stare down between Mirko and Vanderlei Silva, trust us, it might be the single greatest pre-fight stare down in MMA history. And given the subject matter of this list, we're obviously going to talk about Vanderlei Silva. Because if you have a nickname like the Axe Murderer, yeah, you're not exactly checking under your bed for the boogeyman every night. Vanderlei in his prime was one of the most terrifying fighters to ever do it. The way he used to rub his palms together in the seconds before a fight, like he was savoring the opportunity to inflict violence. Silva was like something out of an 80s horror movie. He fought with the aggression of 5 men, and with a chin as good as his, he was damn near impossible to stop in his tracks. And when he did get his opponents into the corner, the way he tended to open up with hooks was truly frightening. Why would you ever fear any of your opponents when you could fight like Vanderlei could? And by all accounts, he was a pretty lovely dude behind the scenes, proving that not all vicious competitors carry that aggression into outside life. Speaking of which, how about the general demeanor of Fedor Emelianenko? He could be walking to the cage and take on the most lethal heavyweight of all time, and he wouldn't even blink. His cold and unaffected expression as he made his ring walk is the stuff of legend. And one look at Fedor's resume will be enough to prove that he probably should have been afraid. He literally fought everyone, every possible great fighter he could get his hands on, and for the most part, he beat them all. One of the all-time greats, a man who unfortunately never did make it to the UFC. But speaking of great fighters, who literally took out an entire generation, John Jones managed to beat more former champions than any other fighter in UFC history. That early run after he captured the light heavyweight title was truly insane. And let's not forget that John was the youngest fighter to ever win UFC gold. He did it at 23, and he was immediately taking on legend after legend.
12 years old, and I feel stronger, more comfortable, especially on the ground than ever. With kickboxing, you never know what's going to happen. He zigs, I zag, there was a major filling out process. I actually felt a little goofy on the feet. It's been a while.
Most dudes are barely out of college at age 23. Jones was fearlessly beating some of the all-time greats within the octagon: Shogun Rua, Lyoto Machida, Rampage Jackson, Rashad Evans, and Daniel Cormier. None of them stood a chance. Jones progressed the MMA skill set more than any other fighter who came before him, and arguably anyone who came after him. And his career's achievements read like a VIP list of his era's finest fighters. Jones was just on another level, and to this day, he's in the process of improving his legacy as a heavyweight. The scariest part about Jon Jones' career is that he's not even finished yet. Not even close. He easily carved out a reputation as the greatest light heavyweight of all time. And as most of you know, his GOAT status doesn't end there. And we've got to give some credit to the 205-pound GOAT that came before Jones, because when the UFC really needed a star after the turn of the century, that's when Chuck Liddell really came through for the company. MMA is not just about looking the part, but if it was, Chuck Liddell would win every fight hands down. Sure, the Mohawk was an iconic look, and he was very much the poster boy for the UFC during its golden era, but this longtime light heavyweight champion just had a presence that struck fear into the hearts of every fighter who crossed him. The Iceman carried himself cold, both inside the cage and beyond, and his fighting style, the volume, the counterpunching, the power. It wasn't the type of style that relied on playing it safe. No, Chuck Liddell in his best years had a willingness to compete that few could match. He had the chin to last in a firefight and the power to punish you if you gave him any openings. And sure, his downfall was kinda ugly. However, Liddell's legend has been set in stone because his prime was just about as good as it gets. But we can't talk about Chuck Liddell without giving a mention to the guy who brought the Iceman's reign crashing down. If you want to talk fearless fighters, like we said with Vanderlei before him, one look at the pre-fight demeanor of Quinton Rampage Jackson will tell you everything you need to know. Rampage used to wear a chain around his neck, for God's sake. This man was an absolute savage. And when you make your career fighting some of the most iconic athletes in MMA, having a mentality like Rampage's is an absolute must. In his earliest days in Japan, he captured the imagination of the public and eventually beat UFC representative Chuck Liddell in a major state victory. But when he left Pride and signed for the sport's biggest promotion, UFC fans were left totally shocked when he managed to repeat the feat. He brought the long and celebrated reign of Chuck Liddell to a crashing halt, KOing the Iceman with a thunderous first-round finish. And it was a knockout that Chuck himself would have been proud of. Rampage just had that special something, that fear factor. He carried himself with a level of confidence that lived up to his in-cage performances, and he is without question one of MMA's most fearless competitors. With power in both hands and a level of physicality that most fighters would kill for, the king of the Slam KO was one of the true greats of his era, a ferocious talent who left his mark on many of his contemporaries. We've touched on some bona fide legends of the light heavyweight division, and some true masters of pre-fight mental warfare. These are the MMA fighters that truly fear no one.